August 31st, 1969, the Mississippi-Alabama State Fair in Tupelo. Elvis Presley stands on stage in his hometown, looking out at 18,500 faces. The crowd is wild, electric, roaring with an energy that could shake the earth. But then, something impossible happens. The noise stops, all of it. 18,000 people fall into absolute silence. Not a whisper, not a breath. Elvis freezes. His band stops playing. The entire fairground holds its breath. What caused this sudden, eerie quiet? And what did Elvis do next that left every single person in that crowd in tears? If you've never heard this story, you need to stay with me, because what happened in those few moments reveals something about Elvis that history has tried to bury. Something raw, something human, something that changes everything you thought you knew about the king of rock and roll. Hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next. Let's go back to the beginning of that night. Elvis hadn't performed in Tupelo since 1957, 12 years earlier. This was his hometown, the place where he was born in a two-room shotgun house, the place where poverty shaped him, where music saved him. The anticipation was unbearable. Fans had been lining up since dawn. Local radio stations had been counting down for weeks. This wasn't just a concert. This was a homecoming. This was Elvis returning to the people who knew him before the world did. The stage was set up outdoors under the open sky. The heat was stifling, even as the sun began to set. Elvis walked out in a black leather suit, sweat already forming on his brow, and the crowd erupted. Screams, tears, fainting. Security struggled to hold the barriers. He launched into blue suede shoes, then All Shook Up, then Hound Dog. Every song was a memory, a piece of their shared past. The energy was uncontrollable. But midway through the set, something shifted. Elvis paused between songs, wiping his face with a towel, looking out over the sea of people. He seemed distant for a moment, lost in thought. The band waited. The crowd cheered, but there was a strangeness in his expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing to the audience. He was somewhere else. And then he stepped up to the microphone and said something that no one expected. "I want to tell you something," he said quietly. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. The crowd leaned in, trying to hear. "I want to tell you about my mama." The cheers faded. A hush began to spread. Gladys Presley had died 11 years earlier, in 1958. Elvis had never fully recovered. Those who knew him said he was never the same after she was gone. He rarely spoke about her in public. But tonight, standing in Tupelo, surrounded by the people who had known her, he couldn't hold it back anymore. "She used to bring me to this fairground when I was a boy," Elvis continued, his voice cracking slightly. "We didn't have money for rides or games. We'd just walk around and look at everything. She'd hold my hand and tell me that one day, if I worked hard and stayed good, I could be anything I wanted." The crowd was silent now, completely silent. 18,500 people, frozen in place, hanging on every word. Even the vendors stopped moving. Even the security guards turned to listen. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was confession. This was grief. Elvis looked down at the stage, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the microphone stand. "I miss her every single day," he said, "and I don't know if I've been good enough. I don't know if I've made her proud." That's when it happened. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was sacred. It was the kind of silence that only comes when something deeply human is being shared, when a man who the world sees as untouchable reveals that he's just as broken as the rest of us. And in that silence, Elvis did something no one expected. He began to sing. Not a hit, not a rock and roll anthem. He sang a gospel hymn, "How Great Thou Art." His voice was raw, trembling, filled with emotion that no studio recording could ever capture. He wasn't performing. He was praying. He was reaching out to his mother, to God, to something beyond the fame and the screaming crowds and the impossible weight of being Elvis Presley. And as he sang, something extraordinary happened. People in the crowd began to cry. Not just a few, hundreds, then thousands. Grown men, teenagers, grandmothers, children. Tears streamed down faces and no one tried to hide them. Some fell to their knees, others held each other. The silence transformed into something else, something collective, something overwhelming. It was as if every person there felt the same unbearable ache, the same longing for something lost, something precious that could never be recovered. Elvis's voice cracked on the high notes, but he didn't stop. He kept singing, his eyes closed, his face tilted toward the sky. The band didn't join in. They just watched, as stunned as everyone else. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't planned. This was Elvis at his most vulnerable, his most real, his most human. When the song ended, the silence returned. No one clapped, no one cheered. They just stood there, breathless, unable to move. Elvis opened his eyes, looked out at the crowd, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Not the dazzling, charismatic smile of a superstar, a quiet, grateful smile, the smile of a man who had been seen, truly seen, and accepted. "Thank you," he whispered into the microphone. "Thank you for letting me come home." And then the applause came. Not wild, not frantic, steady, thunderous, filled with love. It went on for minutes. Elvis stood there, tears in his own eyes now, nodding, wiping his face, unable to speak. The moment was too big for words. But here's what most people don't know. Here's the part of the story that makes this night even more significant. After the concert, Elvis didn't leave immediately. He stayed. He walked into the crowd, shook hands, hugged people, signed autographs until his hand cramped. He met families who had known his mother, who had watched him grow up. He listened to their stories, their memories. He gave away his scarf, his rings, even the towel he had used on stage. He gave everything he could because in that moment he wasn't Elvis, the icon. He was Elvis Aaron Presley from Tupelo, Mississippi, standing among his people, trying to find a piece of the boy he used to be. One woman who was there later described it like this: "It felt like he was saying goodbye to something. Like he knew he couldn't come back to that version of himself, but he wanted us to remember it. He wanted to leave a piece of his heart here." And maybe she was right, because after that night, Elvis's life spiraled in ways that are painful to recount. The pressures of fame, the isolation, the physical and emotional toll, all of it accelerated. Some historians believe that Tupelo 1969 was the last time Elvis felt truly connected to who he really was. The last time he allowed himself to be vulnerable in public. The last time he let the mask fall completely. But why did that silence happen? Why did 18,000 people stop everything and listen? There are some who say it was instinct, that crowds can sense when something real is about to happen. Others believe it was spiritual, that Gladys Presley's presence was felt in that place, in that moment, guiding her son toward the truth. And some think it was simply exhaustion, the collective weight of trying to hold on to something beautiful in a world that constantly demands more, louder, faster. Whatever the reason, the silence was a gift. It gave Elvis permission to be human. It gave him space to grieve. And it gave everyone there a reminder that even legends feel pain. Even kings cry. Even the most famous voice in the world can break. If you think about it, that moment in Tupelo reveals something essential about why we're drawn to certain artists, certain performers, certain voices. It's not just the talent, it's the willingness to be real, to show the cracks, to admit that success doesn't erase loneliness, that applause doesn't fill the empty spaces left by loss. Elvis had everything the world could offer, but he still missed his mother. He still felt unworthy. He still needed to be reminded that he was loved, not for what he could do, but for who he was. And that's why this story matters. Because it's not just about Elvis, it's about all of us, the parts of ourselves we hide, the grief we carry in silence, the moments when we just need someone to stop, to listen, to see us as we really are. That night in Tupelo, 18,000 people gave that to Elvis, and he gave it back to them. This is the legacy that doesn't always make it into the documentaries. The humanity, the vulnerability, the truth that behind every icon is a person who hurts, who doubts, who longs for home. And if you've stayed with me this far, I want you to understand something crucial. This channel, The Hidden Legacy, exists to uncover these moments, the stories history tries to forget, the truths that matter more than the myths. So if this story moved you, if it made you see Elvis differently, if it reminded you of your own losses, your own longings, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one, because there are so many more, so many hidden truths waiting to be told, and I need you here with me to keep digging, keep discovering, keep honoring the real people behind the legends. The final thing I want you to know is this. After Elvis left the stage that night, after the hugs and the handshakes and the tears, he went back to his hotel room. His entourage expected him to celebrate, to relive the triumph, but he didn't. He sat alone in the dark for hours. One of his closest friends found him there and asked if he was okay. Elvis looked up and said, "I felt her tonight. I felt my mama, and I think she knows. I think she's proud." That's the real ending to this story. Not the applause, not the fame, just a son, hoping he made his mother proud. And maybe, just maybe, finding peace in the belief that she was watching, that she heard him, that she never really left. 18,500 people witnessed something sacred that night. And now you have too. But there's more to understand. There's a deeper layer to this moment that reveals why Elvis connected with millions of people across generations, across cultures, across every boundary that normally divides us. Elvis grew up in extreme poverty. His family moved constantly, evicted from homes, struggling to afford food. His father Vernon was in and out of work, and at one point was even imprisoned for check forgery. Gladys held the family together through sheer will and love. She was Elvis's protector, his confidant, his greatest believer. When the world told him he was nothing, she told him he was everything. Their bond was so intense that some people misunderstood it. They called it unhealthy, codependent, excessive. But those who truly knew them saw something else. They saw a mother who refused to let poverty steal her son's dreams, and a son who never forgot where he came from, no matter how high he rose. When Gladys died in 1958, Elvis was 23 years old and already the biggest star in the world. He was filming King Creole when he got the news that she was sick. He rushed home to Memphis, but by the time he arrived, she was in a coma. She died 2 days later of a heart attack, though many believe it was hepatitis, complicated by alcoholism brought on by the stress of Elvis's fame. Elvis was inconsolable. At her funeral, he threw himself on her coffin, sobbing, begging her not to leave him. He had to be pulled away. For weeks afterward, he couldn't function. He would drive to the cemetery in the middle of the night and sit by her grave, talking to her, asking her for guidance. Friends said he aged 10 years in those months after her death. And here's the part that makes the Tupelo concert even more devastating. Elvis blamed himself for his mother's death. He believed that his fame, his money, his success, all the things she had wanted for him had ultimately killed her. The pressure, the scrutiny, the fear for his safety, the radical change in their lives, it had been too much for her, and he carried that guilt like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life. So when he stood on that stage in Tupelo 11 years later, in the town where she had held his hand and told him he could be anything, he wasn't just grieving. He was confessing. He was asking for forgiveness. He was trying to reach back through time and tell her that he would trade it all, every bit of fame and fortune, just to have her back for one more day. That's what the crowd heard in his voice when he spoke about her. That's why the silence fell. Because grief, that deep, that honest, that unguarded, it bypasses all the noise and reaches straight into the soul. It doesn't matter if you knew Gladys Presley or not. It doesn't matter if you're a fan of Elvis or not. When you witness someone standing in the wreckage of their own heart and choosing to share it rather than hide it, something in you recognizes the courage that takes. And the gospel song, How Great Thou Art, wasn't random. It was Gladys's favorite hymn. She used to sing it around the house when Elvis was a child. She sang it in church. She sang it when times were hard and hope was thin. For Elvis to sing it that night, in that place, was an act of remembrance, an act of worship, and an act of desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she could hear him. The tears in the crowd weren't just sympathy. They were recognition. Everyone there had lost someone. Everyone. They carried their own secret grief, their own unanswered questions, their own guilt about words left unsaid or love left unexpressed. Elvis gave them permission to feel it. He showed them that even the king of rock and roll couldn't outrun loss, couldn't buy his way out of pain, couldn't perform his way past the truth that love makes us vulnerable and death makes us powerless. What happened after the concert is equally revealing. Elvis didn't retreat into the luxury and protection that fame usually affords. He stayed accessible. He talked to people who remembered his mother, who had stories about her kindness, her humor, her strength. One elderly man told Elvis that Gladys had once bought groceries for his family when they were struggling, and that he'd never forgotten it. Elvis broke down again, right there in the crowd, and hugged the man for a long time. Another woman told him that she'd been at the hospital the day he was born, and that Gladys had been so proud, so full of joy, even though they had nothing. Elvis asked her to repeat the story 3 times, as if he was trying to memorize every detail, trying to hold on to some proof that his mother's happiness hadn't been destroyed by what he became. These weren't photo opportunities. There were no cameras, no press. This was Elvis, unguarded and unmanaged, trying to piece together the parts of himself that fame had shattered, trying to remember who he was before the world told him who he had to be. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. In the years after Tupelo, Elvis's decline accelerated. The prescription drug use, the weight gain, the erratic behavior, the isolation, all of it spiraled. Some believe that night in Tupelo was a turning point, but not in the way you'd hope. It was the moment Elvis realized he could never go back. He could never be that boy holding his mother's hand at the fairground again. He could never escape the cage that fame had built around him. There's a haunting photograph from that night, taken just after the concert ended. Elvis is backstage, alone, sitting on a folding chair with his head in his hands. His hair is disheveled, his suit is soaked with sweat, and his shoulders are shaking. The photographer who took it said Elvis didn't even notice he was there. He was completely lost in his own grief. That photograph never made it into the official archives. It was too raw, too real, too far from the image that Elvis's management wanted to project. But it exists, and it tells the truth that the cheering crowds and sold-out shows could never convey. Behind the legend was a man in unbearable pain, trying to find a way to live with a loss that felt impossible to survive. Now you might be wondering why I'm telling you all of this. Why go this deep? Why not just celebrate the performance and move on? Because the easy version of this story, the sanitized version, is the one that allows us to keep our distance. It lets us admire Elvis from afar, to see him as something separate from ourselves, something larger than life. But the real story, the hard story, the one where Elvis stands on stage and admits he doesn't know if he's been good enough, that story pulls us in. It forces us to confront our own doubts, our own losses, our own fears, that we're not living up to the people we've loved and lost. And that's uncomfortable, but it's also necessary, because here's the truth that the hidden legacy is built on. The legends we worship are not who we think they are. They're not untouchable. They're not immune to pain. They're not living in some separate reality where success equals happiness. They're human, deeply, messily, heartbreakingly human. And the more we understand that, the more we can be honest about our own struggles, our own grief, our own need for connection and grace. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, 8 years after the Tupelo concert. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, but the real cause was more complicated. It was exhaustion, it was addiction, it was the crushing weight of trying to be Elvis Presley every single day when all he wanted was to be the boy his mother loved. At his funeral, thousands of people lined the streets of Memphis, weeping as his coffin passed. They mourned the voice, the charisma, the legend. But those who had been at Tupelo in 1969, those who had witnessed him break open on stage and sing to his mother's memory, they mourned something different. They mourned the man, the son, the human being who never stopped missing the one person who loved him before the world did. And that, more than any hit song or sold-out arena, is his real legacy. The willingness to be vulnerable, the courage to admit brokenness, the refusal to pretend that success can heal the wounds that love leaves behind. If you're still with me, if this story has reached into you and touched something real, then you understand why this channel exists. The Hidden Legacy isn't about nostalgia. It's not about worshipping the past. It's about uncovering the truth. It's about honoring the real human stories that get buried under myth and marketing and the relentless pressure to turn every life into a highlight reel. So here's what I need from you. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, turn on your notifications, because every video we make is an act of resistance against the shallow, sanitized version of history that pretends pain doesn't exist and struggle doesn't matter. Every story we tell is a reminder that the people we admire are just as fragile and flawed and searching as we are. And that's not a weakness, that's the whole point. Check out the videos on your screen right now. More untold stories, more hidden truths, more moments where the mask falls and the real person stands revealed. And remember this, legends are made in the spotlight, but legacies are made in the silence. In the moments when we stop performing and start being honest. In the spaces where grief and love and memory collide and create something that lasts forever. Elvis Presley stopped an entire concert because he needed to speak the truth. 18,500 people fell silent because they recognized that truth as their own. And now, decades later, that silence still echoes, still calls us to be real, still reminds us that the most powerful thing any of us can do is admit we're broken and loved anyway. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring enough to seek out the stories that matter. This is The Hidden Legacy, and this is just the beginning.